Hello and welcome to the Tongue of the Trees channel. I'm Elizabeth Ashley, the Secret Healer, and this video is what is patchouli essential oil good for? And it's interesting actually because it never used to be an oil I use that often, but now it's become an invaluable part of my kit. So one of the things that when we were doing sort of priestess work is we ask what went before, and it's become fascinating to me to always think about what went before. So what was it that caused me to go from really not liking the oil or being that interested in or invested in the oil to really loving it? And I guess two things went before. So the first was that I got a new bottle of oil. I'm just wondering if it's on my table. No, it's not. A new bottle of oil from Kathy's Attars, and Kathy Skipper imports oils made by a gentleman in the Kannauj called Musa Khan, and this is one of the oils distilled by Musa. And my goodness, it's like nothing I have ever smelt or experienced before. It's, in the true sense of the word, divine. And if you think about how fragrance is used in the East, it's considered to be the embodiment of the deity. And patchouli is really important in Hindu, Buddhist and Sikh religions for just the idea of the sacredness of life. And we'll go into that more in the second video. In this first video, we're going to talk about the physical medicine of it. There is going to be an overlap though, because you can't really talk about the history of the plant without involving yourself in this idea of the sacredness. So I should have got the card out before and I haven't, but it is on the top. Oh, systems work. So I don't know if you can see it. The key word on there is harmony. And if you haven't seen patchouli before, perhaps you are surprised by what it looks like, because I always think, oh, it smells really woody. And when I saw it growing in the botanical gardens in Oxford, I was like, I'm sure they must have the label wrong on that. That can't be right that it looks like that, because it is a mint and it has the purple flowers on the top. Doesn't smell minty at all, does it? And what's interesting is I don't really like mints. You will, famously, I don't like mints. I don't like peppermint oil. I do like spearmint a bit. But I think I was probably in the same place with patchouli, but I've grown into it. And part of the growing into it has been becoming more involved in a spiritual path, in a deliberate spiritual path, in listening to spirit and analysing every second of my day, really, from the point of view of spirit. And I've found that patchouli has a big part to play in that, and we'll talk about it in the second video. So as I say, this video is all about the physical medicine. If you do want to watch the second video, and I hope that you do, because we'll talk about the emotional, mental and spiritual, but also the safety and blending of the oil, look in the description below and you'll see a blog post, thesecrethealer.co.uk, and a link to go to the other video there. So let's think about the history though, because there was a really tremendous, famous, lovely article by a lady called Leslie. I've forgotten her surname, which is not good, but it was in Cosmopolitan in the 1960s, and she really brought together about all of the history of patchouli and how it related to how they were using it in the 60s. And of course, even now when we smell it, a lot of people will go, oh, just think of hippies when I smell it. So this is interesting to see that we're in another incarnation yet again from it. But she talks about how it came to come to England in the mid-19th century. So I will tell a story because I think it's really fascinating to understand the context of the plant. So we can really thank the Empress Josephine for the original incarnation of it coming to England. Josephine would wear these beautiful shawls that were very thin muslin, and they'd have been imported from India, and they would be imported, well, I will go more into the imported in a minute, but about 50 years later, again, shawls became the thing. In fact, I'm going to put mine on, not because it's part of the video, but because it's so cold in here and I feel like I need to embody the shawl. It's snowing outside, I will tell you. Oh, that's so much better. And then about 50 years later, the French Empress Eugénie started to wear her shawls, which were cashmere, and they had been imported from the Canauge. And these were exquisite items. The families that had woven them had spent their entire lives weaving legends and weaving symbolism into these, and they would have silk stitching around the side, and they just cost exorbitant amounts of money, and they were imported in hundreds of thousands across to England because people, and to Europe I should say, people couldn't get enough of wearing the same as Eugénie, that they wanted this cashmere scarf. So they were woven, obviously cashmere is a goat, and so they had this sort of brownish colour and they're all dyed, but they kind of kept this goatish smell, which was okay in India because it was part of their cultural, you know, they were used to it. But when they came to England, England can be very picky. The French can be even more picky, sorry French. But they were like, I don't know, no, we shouldn't smell like that. So what they did was they put patchouli leaves in between the layers of the scarves, and when they got here they smelt of this strange, mysterious, musty, smoky, earthy, minty, greeny, strange ethereal smell. And at the same time, the weaving industries around the world, but particularly in Paisley in Scotland, thought, well, God, there's an industry here, I'll have a piece of this. And they started to weave their own shawls. Paisley is a beautiful pattern, and Paisley scarves are still very popular today. But of course, they didn't smell right. So they couldn't command the massive amounts that they could. But then, believe it or not, there's a tale that says that bandits stole onto the, found their way to being staff or getting hired onto the ship, and would rifled through the scarves and had managed to find some of this patchouli and gone, it's that! And of course the secret was then out. And so on one hand they'd lost the power of the patchouli, but then the world wanted patchouli, and so they were importing patchouli oil and dried patchouli leaves for all manner of things, and they became a tremendous fixative for potpourris. So you'd have this note running through the potpourris in the bedroom. It was in all of the perfumes, and in particular, so we're talking at the moment about the sort of mid-19th century. Probably about 20 years after that, they started to get the synthetics coming through, and of course they were able to reproduce it and use it into synthetic perfumes. Really powerful stuff. And it really became part of not only the female wardrobe, but particularly the female evocative wardrobe. And it was being used equally on both sides of the channel. So, you know, when you see the wenches and the harlots with all their bits out and they're lifting their crinolines and showing off their white stockings and their kid boots, you can imagine that they were redolent of the patchouli. You go into the Moulin Rouge and see the coquettes, they're redolent of patchouli, and so it became the fragrance of the age. And there's one story, and the name of the lady has completely passed me by now. It was a society lady, but I presume she was a madam, that the men used to pay for her to put their handkerchiefs into her corset, or to sleep with them under her pillow, because then it would become redolent of her patchouli, and they'd be able to smell the patchouli, but also her oozing sex. So, you know, there's definite connotations going on here, isn't there? And what's interesting, though, is the very spiritual nature, going back to the Hindu stories and the incenses, is the sacredness of life. That everything is sacred, everything is to be enjoyed, everything is lustrous. And even the act, for example, of just sitting under the tree reading becomes a contemplative act, a divine act, worth having. It has substance in its own right. And so we have these overlays of the coquette, the sex, the flirtation, the stories of these ladies called les lions, and so it's like Lionnes, Lion, and they would dress in their black suits, and they would have like a tuxedo, and they'd have their smoking lorgnette, and they'd have fiery red hair like mine, but all frizzy and curly in the 1920s. And of course they were, you know, that nation's transgender, time transsexual, and they were there for whomever they felt needed to be pleased. But there was this idea that it all had value, it all had worth. So it's imbued in the plant, but it's also, we remember what the plant has seen. In bee medicine, in bee shamanism, there's this idea of telling the bees, and that the information that goes into the hive can be regurgitated at a later date. But the same happens with plants, what the plant has seen. So the way that it goes through ebbs and flows of fashionability, particularly with patchouli, more with patchouli than any other plant I know, as it became involved in those kinds of people. So we say with the ladies like the Lion, we say with the harlots, the coquettes, but also the society ladies, you know, people who would be taken into Buckingham Palace, produced at court. These were respectable women. This wasn't just about sex. This was about attractability. This is about a sensuality. So it didn't necessarily mean gutter snipes, you know. It was more about the inner beauty, the inner sexuality coming out. So that it lives within the plant. And then later we think about the hippies and the way that they were so careful towards other people. You know, they wanted to think about the planet, love one another, be part of this beautiful movement of care, also part of the medicine of patchouli. So interesting, you know, so it is inextricable. You can't talk about that, the physical medicine, without talking about that. On top of that, though, the physical medicine is particularly cell regeneration and skin. If you have acne and you're starting to see scarring, in particular, for me, one of the best creams that I ever had was I went to, my 21st birthday, went to Egypt to go and see the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And before I went, because as you can imagine, this Skin and Sun, it's not so bad now, but when I was a kid, oh my goodness, I spent lobster years. So Mum had made me this cream, and it was in particular cardamom and patchouli. Oh, it was fantastic. My skin just was so good the whole holiday. No burning at all, and it was just gentle and stayed moisturized. And had I not used it, I would have been completely like a lobster, but also it would have been dried like leather, you know. So I don't think we would say it has sun protective qualities. It has regenerative and protective and nurturing qualities. It's also useful in situations, for example, it has a vague antifungal nature to it. I can think of, see, I'm going back exactly what I would have done before. I can think of better antifungals, like tea tree, for example, like Palmarosa, but it does have a deodorant quality to it. So things like foot balms for athlete's foot or smelly feet, we're using right across the gamut. So patchouli is extremely useful for that. We probably don't need to labour the aphrodisiac nature. But what I can say is it's extremely warming, and it's stimulating from the point that it stimulates wakefulness, which is very strange because we also use it for insomnia. And it is a paradox that I cannot explain. But what I can say is when you are lazing in bed with the one that you love, if we're thinking Kama Sutra, Tantra perfumed garden, there is no desire to go to sleep, you know? That feeling of there is worth in this. I'm treasuring this. This is so, so special, you know? But it is also used for insomnia. So it's very, very weird, and I cannot explain it. So like for that point of view, I would say to you, it wouldn't be an oil that I would pick to say treat insomnia. But if you are, so this is probably a good way to explain it. Energetically, it moves energy down from the head into the body. So in a case for, we're talking about sex here. We're talking about anxiety of sex. We're talking about worries about how we feel. We're talking about things that could go wrong. And those situations that suddenly go, where's the erection gone? Or clamming up. So we have things like vaginismus, or, you know, those kind of situations that, or lock down the sexuality, and it's all going on up here, and it makes most sense that it will come that will happen down there, but it does. Patchouli is so good for kind of just smothering those sounds in your head, pulling them down and bringing the energy down into the physical body so that the sex is retained. It's very interesting how it works. So from that point of view, we can also see how it would work on sleep, that we, you know, the worries are quietened. The poem that goes with this, it might be helpful to understand. I'm hoping that you've come here because you've bought a bottle of patchouli, but if you haven't, and you haven't witnessed the energy yet, perhaps the poem that patchouli gave to me will help you. It says, there's a beat, the song of patchouli, deep in your heart, whispering patchouli, grounding space, stroking patchouli, anchoring thoughts, peaceful patchouli. Energy down in the pelvis, patchouli, kundalini climbs, sensual patchouli. Come back to yourself. Feel me, patchouli. So you have this feeling of just everything else is peripheral, just coming back to the sacredness of life. We're back to the beginning again. So there's quite a lot there for you to go on. You'll see the slides in a moment that will tell you about what I've talked about. But also, please do come across to the next video. As I say, the video is underneath, where we're going to talk more about the emotional, mental, spiritual. I'm going to get Gagley Halodi, who is my co-creator in the Tongue of the Trees cards, to talk to you about how he blends patchouli, because I find it an easy one to blend, but not many people do, I don't think. And he is the king of botanical perfumery. And of course, we'll talk about the safety. So for now, though, I'm going to say thank you for being with me for what is Patchouli Essential Oil good for the physical body. And we will see you in the next video, where we will get even more interesting into how to use it on a more deeper basis.
You get your phone, you turn it this way up, and then there's a little red subscribe button. Turn it grey by clicking it, and then there's a little bell. Click that and press all at the bottom of your phone or tablet or computer. It'll say you will receive all notifications, and then there's a little hand with a thumbs up. Click that, it'll turn it blue and it says added to your liked videos, and there will be comments, and if you want to, you can send a comment and say like hi's to Mum and Gagley, and then the link to the next video will be in the description below underneath the video. So bye.